Hi, everybody. We'll get started here shortly. All right. In the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody for joining in today. You're in for an exceptional treat because we have with us Dr. Thomas J. Durant Jr. Dr. Durant is from Mansfield, Louisiana. He earned his bachelor's degree at Grambling State University, his master's degree at Tuskegee University, and his PhD in sociology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He has served as a professor of sociology at Virginia State University and a professor of sociology at LSU. He is the former director. He is a former director of the African and African American Studies at LSU, and he is an author as well, a scholar, a speaker, as we'll see today, and a community volunteer. In fact, he and I are um, board members at the River Road African American Museum in Donaldsonville, Louisiana. And he is the author of A View from the Inside, 36 Years of Desegregation, Our Roots Run Deep, A History of the River Road African American Museum, and co-author of A History of the Charity Hospitals of Louisiana, a study of poverty, politics, public health, and the public interest, and Plantation Society and Race Relations, The Origins of Inequity. He has published a large volume of articles in scholarly journals, has received numerous academic and community service awards. He is currently Emeritus Professor of Sociology at LSU and Professor of Urban Higher Education at Jackson State University, and he currently resides in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So I want to give a warm welcome to you, Dr. Durant, and say thank you for taking this time out of your schedule to share with us today. So I'm going to go ahead and share, and we'll get the presentation started here. Dr. Durant, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and start.
Okay, thank you a lot, Dr. Zenon, and also Ms. Morrison and the host, and to all of the students, faculty, administrators, and staff members of the River Parishes Community College. I am very pleased to be with you today by Zoom and to share with you my book entitled A View from the Inside, 36 Years of Desegregation. And I am a resident of Baton Rouge, but I am originally from a small town in northwest Louisiana. I traveled around the country and around the world and then found my way back to the state of Louisiana. And lo and behold, I was called to serve as a professor at Louisiana State University. And the slide that you are viewing now is the cover of the book. And The cover depicts a man looking up at the historic LSU Memorial Towers. He is glancing at this tower because he is off campus looking into the campus and longing to become enrolled at Louisiana State University. And just imagine, before African Americans could enroll at LSU, they could only imagine what it would be like to attend the university. They could watch from Highland Road, which is a state highway that runs through the campus of LSU. And they could look into the campus and look up at this tower that epitomized a historic landmark of Louisiana State University. However, since Black people were not admitted to LSU before the early 50s, he could only long and hope that one day things would be different. Well, things changed over the years. Next slide. And I was employed at LSU on August 23rd, 1973. However, just to give you a little bit of my background, and I call it the road to LSU, because a lot of things transpired before I entered the halls of LSU. I am a native of Mansfield, Louisiana, where I spent from the time I was born in 1941 up until 1959, when I left to enter Grambling State University in Grambling, Louisiana. This is significant because only 2 HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, were open, public institutions were open to Blacks at the time. There was Grambling State University and Southern University. So I matriculated at Grambling in 1959 and graduated in 1963. I spent 2 years in the U.S. Peace Corps in the country of St. Lucia, the West Indies, where I spent 2 years working as an agricultural development specialist. Then I attended a private HBCU, Tuskegee, Alabama, before going on to Madison, Wisconsin, where I did doctoral studies, completed my studies in 1972, worked at another HBCU from 1972 to 1973, and then on to Baton Rouge, where I accepted a position as professor of sociology in 1973. I want to mention that this was the first time that I had set foot on the LSU campus. I had visited Southern University many times, which is the historical HBCU located about 10 miles upriver from LSU. But it was a known tradition at the time that Southern University was for Black students and LSU was for white students only. Next slide. Now, I thought I would share with you my 10-point negotiation plan, because I realized that Black professors were in high demand, but they were scarce resources because in 1970, there were only about 150 African Americans who had gained a PhD in sociology. And when the desegregation movement opened, there was this mad rush to hire African-American professors. And so I had to have a negotiation plan for selling my skills and resources if I were to come back to the state of Louisiana. These were the conditions on which I negotiated for accepting a position at LSU. And I think this is important to mention because I did not create segregation, but I had to respond to it as an African-American professor who had gone out and earned the highest degree in my profession. And if LSU wanted to hire me, I laid down my 10-point plan as to the points of my negotiation, and you see that. I just would mention one of the factors, relocation and readjustment, was a factor based on the need to be able to have living accommodations in an area around LSU that was not available to many African Americans at the time. So I call it relocation and readjustment. Next slide. Now, this is the problem as I see it, or if you will, this is the challenge as I saw it. And the challenge involved racial desegregation. And I know I'm speaking to faculty, students, and staff of a college. And so forgive me if I sound like a lecturer, because I want to share with you some terms that are important to know if we are to understand what desegregation is. Racial desegregation is the number and percentage of Blacks or racial minorities within a university over a given period. So in this sense, it was a Black-white desegregation, or the entrance of Black students, professors, and staff into literally an all-white university at the time. Next slide. Now, the concept of desegregation is a process by which members of a minority group, and in this case, it was an African American, who voluntarily or by court order entered a majority race institution. At LSU, it was by court order because there were court briefs filed in order to desegregate LSU. Now, racial integration, on the other hand, is the process by which racial groups share a common space and interact as equals within the same institution. It is important to note that you can have racial desegregation without having racial integration. So although African Americans were admitted to LSU and desegregated the university, but still there was a lack of racial integration or the acceptance of Black people as equals within the same university as they share a common space. Next slide. Cultural diversity, which you may be aware of. I'm sure you probably have an Office of Cultural Diversity at River Parishes Community College. But it is the racial, ethnic, and demographic composition of the university. And cultural equity means the degree of equality in the distribution of resources, programs, and positions within the institution. Next slide. Now, cultural transformation is the process that involves changes in the quantity and quality of programs and organizations that comprise the institution and the environment of the university. And in other words, to what extent are minority programs accepted and integrated into the university on the campus? And I'll say a little bit more about that later in terms of what it was like at LSU. Multiculturalism is the doctrine that represents the different cultures coming together, sharing a common space, and learning and respecting the culture of each other. Next slide. Now this is the desegregation process. I call it first getting in, which you may relate to as admission, staying in, which some call retention or persistence, helping others get in, which is recruitment, promoting change or cultural transformation of the university, and then getting out honorably, which means graduation or retirement. And as African Americans and other minorities go through the desegregation process, it's not only important that they get in or be admitted, but it's important that they stay in and that the environment is conducive for them to continue their matriculation and be successful and productive students. But the final test is graduation or retirement, and I call it getting out honorably. And so at LSU, I was concerned about all of these stages, not just for students, but for faculty and staff too, from minority groups, and particularly African American. Next slide. Now, let's get into the desegregation process, the stages of desegregation at LSU. And what you see on the screen is what I call stage one of the desegregation of LSU, which took place between 1942 to 1964. The first civil rights case brief that was filed to admit Blacks at LSU occurred in 1942, when a suit was filed by attorney A.P. Turo Sr. from New Orleans, who was a member of the NAACP, for admission of Willie Robertson to LSU. His application was refused, but another suit was filed in 1946 by a man named next suit was filed in 1942 by Charles Hatfield. His admission was denied. Then in 1946, at the University of Texas, there was a test case trying to admit Blacks at the University of Texas. His case was denied. 1950, Roy Wilson versus LSU. His case was denied. Darrell Foster, also in 1950, his case was denied. But in 1951, through the persistent efforts of attorney A.P. Turo Sr. and the student litigants, Luther L. Payne was finally admitted to Louisiana State University. Now, if you read the book, I won't give you all the details, but you'll find information about the court litigation process that led to Luther L. Payne being admitted to LSU. Next slide. Stage 2, 1965 to 1980, involved the accommodation and affirmative action. And I'm sure you've heard of affirmative action, which was a federal program that took legal action for the admission of, to force the admission of Blacks, and also to provide accommodations to them once they were admitted. And this stage of affirmative action involved the gradual admission of a few token Blacks into the atmosphere of Louisiana State University. It was defined as coexistence and compromise, and still fighting for equality within the university in order to meet the demands of African-American students. Next slide. Now, stage 3 took place between 1981 and 1986. It involved the continuing affirmative action and consent decree, which was an out-of-court settlement. The state of Louisiana promised that it will come up with a plan for the desegregation of LSU, and also, ironically, the desegregation of Southern University. So white students would be admitted to Southern University, and more Black students would be representatively admitted to LSU. Well, the consent decree failed to reach its landmarks, and therefore, the dual system of higher education continued in Louisiana. Next slide. This was stage 4, 1997 to 2010, which I call diversity and multiculturalism. And this was, this occurred when more African-American students had been admitted to LSU, but they found the environment hostile and not conducive as a place of learning. And so therefore the institutional environment had to be transformed in a way that represented diversity and multiculturalism, where African-American students not only could attend LSU, but would feel comfortable in their environment and would have social programs and cultural programs to meet their needs and demands. Next slide. Now, I want to give you some indication of how desegregation affected Blacks and other minorities on the LSU campus. Now, I was engaged in all of these entities because I was a part of the Black Faculty and Staff Caucus, and our mission was to help promote social transformation of LSU. But these were some of the challenges that we had to face. And I won't go over all of them, but I'll just highlight a few of them. First was the Black male-female disparity. At LSU, there were 2 Black females to every Black male. So it created a social disparity in dating and courtship and intergender relations and activities. Racial disparities in athletics. Can you imagine the football team, the basketball team, and the track team being at least 70% African-Americans, while the student body was only 6%, a great disparity. So my position was that if the football team, the basketball team, and the track team can be 70% African-American, we ought to at least have 20% of the students should be African-Americans. Now, the population of the Louisiana has about 1/3 African-Americans. So really the goal should have been to increase the percentage of African Americans at LSU to at least the same percent as what represented in the state of Louisiana. Some of the other effects was racial discrimination in employment, Black student protests and marches on the administration building, Black first, white racial hostility, the use of the N-word, interracial dialogues, racial unrest in residence halls. Some white students refused to accept Black roommates, and therefore it caused a big uproar in the residence hall. Next slide. Rebel flags were flown during the Martin Luther King Freedom March. A cafeteria in the student union was named the Plantation Room that depicted a large Black male holding a platter serving white folks. The word nigger was written on the door of the African American Culture Center. And I also experienced a KKK sign that was scribbled on my door, and a leaflet invited me to a KKK rally was left on my door. Now, how about that for an introduction as a professor, an African-American professor on the campus of LSU. David Duke was a student at LSU at the time who invited me to debate him at free speech rally, which I refused. After all, he was a student and I was a professor. So I told his henchmen to tell him that until he got his PhD degree, he was not really qualified to debate an African-American professor. Next slide. White students mocking Blacks with painted Black faces, racial offenses, cartoons in the reveille, racial slurs painted on written on restroom walls, buildings named after races, including of all places, the LSU library, which was the Militant Library. Militant was a staunch segregationist, and he refused to accept the admission of Black students at LSU. So in 2020, the LSU African-American students and even many of the white students staged a demonstration, and now the name of Troy Militant has been taken off of the LSU library, and hopefully will be replaced with a more decent person, probably an African-American. How about that for social change? Next slide. White students refusing to accept Black roommates. One white student told a Black student that she should sit in the back of the class where you belong. Articles in the reveille appeared opposing affirmative action and desegregation. In fact, one article indicated that all the Black students should go to Southern University and only white students should attend LSU. Now, I know we're talking about the 70s and the 80s, but that has not been too long ago. At the same time, Black people represented almost 90% of the wage workers, the janitors, the cooks, the household, the cleaners, and the laborers, the yard workers. 90% were African Americans. So if you were a student coming into LSU at that time, the first African American that you probably would see would be a maintenance worker. Or if you went to the cafeteria, it would be a cook or a household worker. Next slide. A Black student charged a white professor with racism. Black couples were not allowed to be on the cheerleading squads, although the majority of the football and basketball players were Black. No Blacks were in top administrative positions, and a Black professor who was me was mistaken by an elderly white woman for a janitor. I'll tell you about that later if you have any questions about it. Next slide. Now, these are some of the activities that the Black Faculty and Staff Caucus engaged in during my tenure at LSU. I am a founding member of the Black Faculty and Staff Caucus, along with Dr. Carolyn Collins and Dr. Alan Lee. We felt that if change were going to occur at LSU, if there were going to be social transformation and racial integration, then the few Blacks who were at the university had to undertake the initiative and the movement to bring about change, because we did not see that whites had the same interest in promoting change as Blacks. So these are some of the things that we were engaged in. So we were not only professors, we were change agents. We were affirmative action agents. Before there was a Office of Diversity, we were the diversity program at LSU. Can you imagine being an employee and having your own obligations, but at the same time, acting as a diversity agent? So I had to take time from my position as professor. And yes, it was worth it. And yes, I would do it all over again, because I would not have been able, I would not remain at LSU if I could not have been a part of the social transformation process. Next slide. Again, these are additional activities. Read them, and maybe you can get a sense of what they involve. Next slide. African-American professors were asked to serve on committees, task forces, commissions to investigate charges of racism, racial discrimination, inequality at no extra compensation. My job description did not include this. However, I feel like it was in the best interest of not only myself, but other minorities and the university as well, to help promote social change for racial desegregation and racial integration at LSU. Next slide. Again, these are some of the organizations that exist in the transformation. I call it the Africanization of LSU. During my tenure at LSU, no less than 30 African-American programs were established from the time I arrived in 1973 to the time that I retired in 2009. We had an MLK Action Movement, Harambe, which was the only Black student organization that was founded in 1968. We had 7 Black fraternities and sororities that originated between 1972 and 1980. We formed the Black Faculty and Staff Caucus. We had also African-American student organizations, the Black United Students. Next slide, please. And we also had, and a lot of people did not know this, an LSU chapter of the NAACP, which was formed in 1980. I was instrumental in helping to establish that chapter at the request of the state director of the NAACP, Mrs. Rupert Richardson. So I got a call one day and she said, do you think that we could get a chapter of the NAACP established at LSU? And I said, why not? Because the NAACP is all about equality and integration and desegregation. So that chapter was established in 1980, and I'm happy to say that it still exists as a vibrant program pursuing the mission of the NAACP on the campus of LSU. We had many Black speaker series. We brought in no less than about 50 outstanding Black speakers who came to LSU to bring voices and messages of freedom and justice and equality to an institution that prior to 1951 had no African Americans, so that not only Black people could be educated, but white people could be educated too about Black culture. The African American Culture Center was formed in 1988. The AP Two-Row Alumni Chapter was formed in 1988. And then the Minority Action Team and MATNAP programs were also established in the early 1990s. Next slide. The cultural transformation at LSU also involved the African and African American Studies program. I was a part of the founding committee to establish the program, and I also serve as the first director. And now LSU has an African and African American Studies program that has no less than 24 courses in the LSU curriculum on African American topics in the history department, sociology, anthropology, English, and some of the other departments also have courses in these areas. And so this lies at the heart of the university, education. We felt that education needed to be more holistic, need to be more representative of African American people, because having African Americans and white students enrolled at LSU, some of whom had never had a course in African American studies, some who never had a course in African American history. So we were happy to add that dimension to LSU. We also established a robing ceremony, a Black Faculty Association, Black History Month. Bobby Seale, who was a former member of the Black Panthers, was invited to LSU to speak. And you can have to read the book about this because it created quite a fervor. Some people did not want him to come, but we campaigned for his trip, and he came to LSU and spoke in the student union. We had Kwanzaa, Juneteenth, and other programs that were added to the social and cultural environment of LSU, some of them for the first time. We also had 57 Black Firsts. And in my book, I spell out who these Black Firsts were. I was one of them, the first Black in the sociology department and the first Black in some of the other involvements at the university. We hope to get to a point where Blacks will not only be the first, but there will be seconds and thirds and fourths and fifths, and to the point whereby they will not be an odd entity of being a Black first in a predominantly white university. Next slide. Well, we come to the final slide, and I want to close on this metaphor, which I call Panthers in Tiger Country. And as I recite this metaphor, I want you to see if you recognize any of the things that I mentioned in my presentation about what went on at LSU. Now you see on the left, a panther, who obviously is Black, and on the right, a tiger. And now a panther and a tiger are members of the same family, the cat family, the feline family. They live in the same territory, and they must eat similar foods and occupy a shared space in the same habitat. And the question is, can panthers and tigers live together in peace? Panthers in tiger country. On a humid summer morning, deep in the jungle, a young panther peeped out of a hole in his den and was greeted by the morning sun and a warm southern breeze. He surveyed the landscape to determine the direction in which he should travel to find food for the day. As he moved across the barren terrain and into the underbrush, he was met with silence and no signs of life. No elephants, no giraffes, no hippos, no rhinoceros, no monkeys, no antelopes, not even a bird. As he ventured deeper into the jungle in search for food, he came to a sign written in bold, intimidating letters. This is tiger country. Other creatures keep out. However, the young panther knew that in order for him to survive in this hostile land, he must quickly learn the skills necessary for survival. After meeting with other panthers who were on the same mission and shared the same plight, they were convinced that in order to survive, they must form a strong bond and band together as a group, because a group of panthers was stronger than an individual panther. Ironically, in another part of the same jungle, the tigers were gathered in a meeting place to discuss how to deal with the panthers that were invading their territory. A young tiger suggested that they chase the panthers away and devour any of them who refused to leave. A middle-aged tiger suggested letting the panthers remain if they agreed to live in a separate, segregated part of the jungle. Finally, an elderly tiger spoke up and said, "This jungle does not belong to any of us. We did not create it. We found it here just like the panthers did because of life circumstances. Also, you should remember that we made a pact with the lions of this jungle to live in peace and harmony with them if they would permit us to share this space. If we devour the panthers, who is to say that the lions won't devour us?" Although there was still grumbling among some of the younger tigers, it was the consensus of the majority to let the panthers remain in the land and live in harmony with them. As the panthers crept deeper into the jungle in search for food, they came upon another sign which read, "Welcome, panthers." My 36-year tenure at LSU spanned the 3 decades of the desegregation movement at the university. During the latter stage, a discernible degree of cultural diversity had taken place. By the year 2000, more than 30 African-American organizations and programs had been established that changed the racial and cultural fabric of the university. Diversity and multiculturalism had become the new norm, which engendered a greater sense of shared ownership by racial and ethnic minorities. Despite the lack of attainment of all of the desegregation goals, LSU had progressed significantly beyond the rancorous racial desegregation movement of the 1960s and 1970s. During the last few years of my tenure at LSU, I no longer felt like a stranger in a foreign country, or like in the metaphor, a panther in tiger country. I no longer felt like an odd specimen under a microscope, but like a vested stakeholder of the university who helped advance the causes of education and who helped make LSU a better place for everyone. Before my retirement from the university, on August 8, 2009, I realized that in working to promote cultural transformation of LSU, I had become enamored with the Tiger spirit, and therefore I can say, go Tigers. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. If there are questions and answers or comments, I would be happy to take them at this time.
Dr. Durant, I just would like to say thank you so much for joining us today and for supporting RPCC on this effort as we launch Beyond the Block and share Black history, your history, in fact, with many others of our counterparts. I thank you for joining us on this call today. I'm so proud to be a part of this continued effort to create a sense of urgency in making the next generation of students and people at large aware of all that's been done in the past and what continues to be done today on our behalf. And so thank you so much for sharing just a little bit of your story with us. I'm glad to have you and glad that we had so many join us today.
Well, you are quite welcome, Ms. Morrison. And remember that the journey for justice and equality continues. And it continues not only at LSU, but it continues throughout this state and this nation. We have just witnessed the Black Lives Matter movement. We have witnessed political crisis. We are not at the end of the journey. At River Parishes Community College, at LSU, at Southern, at institutions across the state of Louisiana, we have to continue to work to promote just causes for justice and equality, to help improve the conditions for all of the people on your campus and on all campuses across the state of Louisiana. And I think hopefully that this can help motivate persons at your college, university, because I know there are some things that you see on a day-to-day basis that are in need of change. And so we have to all join in this movement together. And I was so happy to see that the Black Lives Matter movement was a coalition of Blacks and whites and Hispanics and young and old. And I think hopefully this is an indication that a new day is dawning and that all people will see the need for bringing about equality and justice that can make all people feel like they are valued and a valued part of the institutions in which we are a part. And we are all there for the same purpose. And we all need to certainly share in the same benefits of what we receive on our college campuses and our universities.
Dr. Durant, I wanted to just chime in and say thank you so much for taking time to share your story tonight. Monica invited us this morning, she and I and several others on the call, on the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force for the Louisiana Community and Technical College System. I'm up north at Bossier Parish Community College, and I just found your story so inspiring. My son is at LSU. He's a senior there in Baton Rouge, and he never comes back north. Once they go south, they never come back.
Yes.
But I just found it compelling. I could listen to you all day. I love just hearing stories of where we came from and just to keep us reminded about where we're going. And you're absolutely right. We have so much work to do. And I took a couple of screenshots because some of the things that you guys listed as initiatives are initiatives still today, and I think that I will take those back to our group and make sure that we address some of those things, because although things have gotten better, there are some areas, especially now, I think after the pandemic, with the, we've spent a lot of time away from campus, and now that we rejoin back together, we need to, remember that this work must continue and everybody needs to feel comfortable and at home. So, but anyway, just thank you. And I'd love for you to share your story again so that more of our faculty and staff could get a chance to hear.
Yes, well, thank you, and I'd be happy to. You can get a copy of this book on Amazon.com.
Okay, I'm gonna buy it right now.
It's available, and you can use it. It's been used as a kind of a resource in some of the colleges and universities, and it's still being used at LSU because, in order for history not to repeat itself, at least the bad part of it, we have to educate ourselves so that the bad parts of history won't repeat itself. And so we will know going forward what we need to do to rectify the condition that exists. By the way, I'm from Mansfield, DeSoto Parish. I've been to Bossier Community College. I'm from that part of the state. And also I want to mention to you that the desegregation program at LSU started with students. African-American students in 1967 started the Harambee movement, and they demanded changes because, as I mentioned, what good is it to recruit African-American students if you don't have an environment conducive for them to learn and to share and to engage in? And so they wanted social transformation of the university so it would be a livable place and that would be reflective of their culture as well as other cultures. So in 1968, Harambee was formed, and it's a Swahili word that means coming together, unity. And I would like to hear a little bit about what's going on at River Parish's community colleges and what some of the challenges that y'all are facing there. Maybe it's too, we don't have enough time to go into that, but I would suggest that if you're not doing it, to establish some dialogue among students and faculty and staff too, to address some of the issues, because we just can't sweep these issues under the rugs and ignore them as if they don't exist. And we don't want to just be perceived as troublemakers, but as John Lewis said, sometimes you have to make good trouble in order to bring about good change.
That was interesting what you said. I'm sorry, I'll be finished, but what you said about students, because a lot of the work that we're working on, well, I know on our campus, it's for students, but not led by students. So that's absolutely interesting. And that's something that I'm going to take back with some of the work that we're doing right now is student focus groups, student-led focus groups would be fantastic. And there's a lot of, in a lot of ways, I think that we're disconnected, but my particular generation, we came from the aspect of we want to do it all for our kids. We want to do everything for them. And I think that's not necessarily the right thing. I agree. I'm so glad that you said that, because that's not something that we've been focusing so heavily on. Even when we try and market and recruit students, we don't even necessarily, we need students to help us with that. We need to really listen to them and let them lead that charge, so that we'll, of course, there are obvious things that we need to work on, but we've done some surveys and things like that to hear from them, but I'd love to give them more of a role in pushing and guiding and directing that change. That was great. I'm glad that you said that.
Yes, because actually the students represent the sort of the engine of the university, and they can effect change probably better than any other entity in the university. Let me tell you something that happened in 1988. It's been a long time ago, but you can appreciate this. The African-American student athletes on the football team decided that they were not going to play football unless they had blacks on the homecoming court and also be considered in the election for homecoming queen. Because to be an athlete and not be represented, of course, in the auxiliary programs like cheerleading and homecoming queen was kind of offensive to them, that they were good enough to play football, but not to be on a cheerleading squad or to be homecoming queens or kings or in the homecoming court. And so they helped change the dynamics of this desegregation and internal integration of LSU, because they stood up and said that we want to be involved not only in football, but into all facets of this university.
Did you say 1988?
Yeah, it was around 1988.
Wow.
Yeah. And see, it was in the early mid-80s before the majority of the football team, the basketball team, and the track team became African Americans. And at the same time, only about 8% of the student body was African American. So you see the contrast. And so my position was that if you can recruit 80% of the football or basketball team as African American, why couldn't you have at least 10 to 20% of the student body African American? You know, because after all, education is more important than athletics. I mean, at least that's the way I feel. I don't know if everybody in Louisiana thinks that, but and the staff, we had a Black faculty and staff caucus. The staff and faculty had to organize. But you know, the university finally embraced this because they realized that we were helping them do what they were hired to do, which was to help bring about multiculturalism. So actually, we became an asset to the university. The only unfortunate thing is that we were not getting paid for it, because that was not in my job description, but it was out of my sense of obligation and duty that if I were going to be a professor there, that it was my civic duty to help foster social change in the university.
Well, Dr. Durant, listening to your story is quite inspiring. It makes me proud to say that I know you and that we are serving together at the River Road African American Museum. I've learned a lot from you just by watching many times and just by listening. So I'm always appreciative to be in the presence of Dr. Durant, because I feel inspired on every occasion. So I definitely want to thank you for bringing your story to us, and we look forward to hosting you in the coming months to continue your series, because this was just the first part. We're working out the dates and what have you, for the future presentations, and we'll be sharing that information as soon as it's available, because we hope to grow the audience. Even though I am quite pleased to see so many who have taken time to join in this afternoon, and so I am always appreciative and grateful, because you always give me insight as to how we can continue to move this work forward. I am proud to serve with my colleague, Ms. Morrison. She is, a strong ally in this fight, and And I know that together we're going to do lots of great things to move RPCC forward. And your story is always inspirational um, to us, and a light, a fire under our feet, so to speak. So thanks a lot for joining us this afternoon. And everybody, please be sure to come back, because I'm sure Dr. Durant is going to have some more great information to share with you.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Dr. Zenon. And I look for other opportunities so that we can share, work together on different projects to help advance the causes of River Parishes Community College.
Thanks, everybody. We'll be sharing the recording so that you can spread the word and share it with your colleagues. So everybody have a great afternoon. Thanks for joining in.
Okay, all right, goodbye.
Good evening, guys.